We were designed to create, but what does that look like in the hard places of transition? Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Navigate. The vision I have for this show is to encourage and resource all you listeners out there who are facing some kind of transition, whether that be personal or professional. And if I haven't hit on a topic yet, something transition related that you'd really like to engage with, would you reach out and let me know? I'd love to hear from you, get your feedback, get your input, so we can approach this important part of life from every angle possible. That being said, I think you're going to hear some things today that we haven't touched on yet. Transitions can be packed full of creative moments and opportunities. Today we'll be having a conversation with Sara Simons as she talks about creating new in transition seasons. Sara, together with her husband Jeff and 2 children, have resided in Malaga, Spain for the past 7 years. Sara has spent the last 10 years working as a cross-cultural transitions coach, and before that, 7 years working for Young Life Ministries, both stateside and in England. Sara has her own coaching practice called The Way Between, where she creates resources and workshops using life planning tools, art, and movement. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in intercultural studies, and coaching certification. She loves to come alongside global workers in difficult transitions, helping them discover and co-create their unique path forward, especially if it can be done in nature or while traveling. If you're in any kind of transition, there's some real opportunity here for some perspective shift and just some great encouragement for our listeners today. So listen in as Sara and I talk about creating new in transition. Thanks so much for joining me today, Sara.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah, so am I. And it's really cool because we just recently met and discovered that we have a lot in common just in terms of what we're passionate about and the coaching world and that we've been a part of and how we integrate that into our ministries and the things we do. So I'm really excited too. So
yeah.
So just kind of maybe we can just open it up. Tell me, where do you live now?
Yes, my husband and myself and our 2 children live in Malaga, Spain, and we've lived here for the last almost 7 years.
Very cool. So the last 7 years, and so that's obviously you've lived in Spanish culture for quite a while. Where did you live before that? What are some other places you've lived?
Yes, good question. I've lived a bunch of places. Before that was California, and that to a lot of Spaniards is the most interesting. So I say I'm from California, even though I grew up in Minnesota, and I've also lived in England and Colorado and Portland, and lots of different places.
Yeah. So why is California, why does that strike a chord in Spanish culture when you tell people that you're from California or you've lived in California?
Yeah, it's really relatable for people.
Yeah.
They often will say to me, it looks a lot like here. Why did you leave? Or, wow, California, we know so much about it from TV or the movies. And so they just are really interested in it. And it sparks a conversation. And they might say, I've never met anybody from California. That's amazing. Why did you come here?
Yeah. Well, my wife and I just, I haven't done this. I haven't spent too much time. It's so funny because we lived overseas for 20 plus years. And so we always kind of get a chuckle out of the fact that I know very little of California history compared to what I know about Central Asia, for example. So it's been a steep learning curve for me. And we visited one of the Spanish, the missions that are throughout California, and that was very cool. And I thought I could do this. I would love to see more of that and just kind of a big piece of our history here.
Right. Yeah. California is really amazing and has so much to offer, as
Yeah.
does Spain. Spain
Oh,
and
yeah.
California have a lot in
Yes.
common, really.
So true. Yeah. So how has Spanish culture impacted or changed you? 7 years is a good time, good amount of time.
Yeah, my daughter was born here. My 5-year-old daughter was born here, and my son and daughter both are really fluent Spanish speakers and pretty much Spanish at heart. And so it's impacted our family to a great degree.
Yeah.
And this is all they've really ever known of home. And so for us, this is where we have been raising children and where our family calls home currently, and where my kids will likely consider home. So Spanish culture in particular, they're very warm and welcoming people, and we've just really felt embraced by the people, the culture. Our language is always ongoing in the learning category, so we feel like that's always a stretch for us because we work in English. But we believe probably the biggest impact for us is the invitation to rest and just the culture of what they call tranquility. So they often, our friends will say, tranquilo, Sara, tranquilo, which means just relax, it's okay. And so that for us has been very welcoming and just a different pace of life, and welcomes and invites us to, yeah, you know what, it actually will be okay. So yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So it in that rest allows for a greater depth of relationships, I'm sure, and taking time for people and all of that, which so many cultures seem to be better at than we are, I think.
Yeah. When somebody says yes, they're going to be there, they really commit to 4 or 5 hours. You don't know the end time.
Yeah.
So you don't really plan in 2 or 3 different events on the same day, and you really get a commitment. But then you might not see people for a few weeks because of that either. So.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned rest. So that's I'm thinking that will probably come into our conversation at some point today.
Yes.
But so tell me a little bit about what you do from a work ministry perspective.
Yeah, from a work ministry perspective, I say I help people create their way out of stuckness, especially in transition. And so I offer creative, holistic life planning for global workers in transition, and come alongside of them to utilize their whole brain and offer some right brain tools, both in art and in movement. But at the bottom line is I help people create their way out of stuckness. So.
Okay, cool. Okay, so those are that unpack that a little bit for me, because there you threw in a few pretty power packed words there: holistic, creative. What else?
Yeah. Well, let me back up just a minute. I will say, in my own recent transition, I experienced a lot of confusion and feelings of stuckness. And I knew that the place and position I was in, my role that I was in, needed to change. I wasn't thriving or utilizing my gifts to the fullest at the time, despite having worked with people in transition for about 10 years.
Okay.
So here I am needing to really live out what I believe, right? This is what we get invited to all the time. So I felt like I really didn't know what was next, and I didn't feel supported to pursue that necessarily. So where I could normally think of my way out of a complicated situation, or really process hard enough to figure something out, I really couldn't do that in this situation. And so I came up short.
Okay.
And so for me, what I kept leaning into, and I felt the invitation to lean into, was more daily being present and really right-brained type of activities. And when I say that, I mean the non-logical, non-linear type of access to our brain. And so it's more of the creative side of our brain. And so I could say quite a bit about that, but that was for me in my own recent transition, my invitation to how to engage and how to really bring in the integration of my whole self into transition. And that's what I had been doing to some degree with people, but man, when you live it out, right, viscerally, you experience it, and it's a completely different ball game, and you go from what could be anxiety producing. And I experienced a ton of anxiety, panic attacks, even claustrophobia. I'd never experienced that before, because I was just really paralyzed in a lot of ways emotionally. But when I would take myself out of the brain processing, overthinking, and really get into my body or get into my heart, it was a completely different experience of processing, from the overwhelm into the creating something into creation.
And so there's that in a big transition, whether that's maybe an internal transition that's going on, you're not really sure how that's going to play out externally, which often is the beginning of big transitions, or some place we feel stuck. What I hear you saying is that from first kind of that whole creative side, the right brain piece, that whole area kind of broke you out, focusing on some of that, getting in touch with the body as well, and just kind of engaging those parts of ourselves that we may not default to normally. That is an area that you've seen for yourself, and now as you're helping others kind of come out of an area of stuckness, a place of stuckness.
Yes, exactly.
That's so cool. That's great. So I'd love to kind of talk more about that, but what do you love about what you do? What do you love about this area of coming alongside others in this way?
Yeah, I love seeing people thrive, and I love watching them really get into their sweet spot. I love seeing people tap into who it is that God created them to be. I think it's so cool as creative people that we were created to be, that we get to access the Creator. And for me, I just am in awe that we were the only thing that He created in His image, but also that He created with an imagination, or He created with the ability to co-create. And so for me, I just love watching people co-create. I love watching people come up with some new insight or some new way of approaching a complex problem. And living into their unique signature or their unique fingerprint in the world. That's what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And so in the global community, global workers, missionaries, sometimes I think maybe people come with the assumption that, well, they've answered the call, they must be in their sweet spot, just kind of that assumption. But is that necessarily true?
Yeah, that's a great question, really. I think the answer is probably yes and no, that they have answered it to some extent, but maybe their unique take on what it is that they're being, introduced to or invited to has not been flourished or isn't blossoming yet. And I often think the creative process is about us either utilizing other people's creativity, or maybe some way that we've been creative in the past, or that we're even destroying and not creating new things. And so that's where I think we get stuck, where we're just hanging on to an idea from maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and we're not necessarily creating new. And so I do think that global workers have this invitation, and they think, okay, I said yes to the call 10 or 15 years ago. How come it's not working now? And that's where you and I probably meet people similarly in that, and we see them burning out, right? Because they're not operating in their best giftedness set. And
Yes.
so in that, we get this opportunity to come alongside of them and say, oh, let us help you not burn out. We want to help
Mm-hmm.
you create. We
Mm-hmm.
want to help you thrive. We want to help you. I like to help people think outside the box. How do
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
come alongside of that? If they're called to something specific, then maybe it's just another tweak on that.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a completely different merging of a concept with something that they're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, just from hearing your story a little bit, um and really that same goes for me in terms of, I did feel stuck. I wasn't ready to just lay down
mm-hmm,
my call as a global worker and to just say goodbye to all those years invested. But
mm-hmm.
I did come to a place where I was like, this isn't working anymore. There's something else.
Right,
And
right.
I needed to discover that. And the Lord brought, set me on a journey of discovery. Some of those creative pieces did come in for me, revived or renewed in my life,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that I had kind of neglected or left dormant, like writing, and
Mm-hmm.
some of those things. So, yeah, so I can certainly and really relate to that, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners out there can relate to that as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're if they are in an area of stuckness, there are, I think we would agree, there are resources, there's support out there,
Mm-hmm.
for you to get in touch with that piece and to begin to at least start the journey of discovery. What could that shift or change look like, and all of that. So, yeah.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So, tell me, you kind of alluded to it, so maybe you want to add something to this, but tell me about one of the most challenging transitions you've navigated.
Yeah, so I was recently in probably one of the most challenging transitions. I feel like most of my transitions haven't been very easy. So
Mm,
I think that that's God's way of nudging me to say, keep at it, Sarah, keep going.
mm,
And every one of these I'm going to use it to help you better understand others. But yeah, my recent transition was definitely one of the hardest. I would
okay.
probably call it my dark night of the soul as
Mm,
well. And just not feeling fulfilled and not feeling like I was really thriving. But as global workers, it's much more complex than that, because, like I said, my family is involved, my kids are involved. It's not just a matter of one role shift; it's a
sure.
matter of multiple complicated implications of one decision.
Mm,
And so that made it really stuck feeling for me, where my husband and I do really similar work, and we started looking at what might it look like where we're not doing similar work for a little while. And that was confusing for us, but also that's what we believe and how we live, that we have unique identities and callings. And so how do we live that out? What does
mm,
that look like? And so that was a few years ago. We're still living into that,
mm-hmm.
and still working out what it looks like even on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And so, yes.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that kind of maybe in the earlier years of life and ministry, you guys had kind of collaborated, worked more together on projects and ministry related things, but the transition has kind of involved this. Well, there's a uniqueness and a giftedness that we each bring. We do bring together to the table, obviously, but also, is there some areas that we would be better off serving,
Mm-hmm.
separately in areas, and exploring those areas of unique giftedness and how the Lord wants to use us as individuals in those areas. So has
Mm-hmm.
that been an ongoing process of just figuring that out? Because I know that kind of we had that too, like in the early days when we were in Central Asia. My wife and I worked closely in a lot of areas, but then we discovered that, well, in this culture, men often work mostly with men, and women mostly work with women. And so we discovered that we had to kind of um, do our separate things, in order to fully, embrace what, a culture, but also the things God had for us. And so that was a big shift for us too.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And for us, it's interesting. We both have, as you mentioned in my bio, the same degrees. So we have the same bachelor's, the same master's, and we both are coaches. And so we ironically have the exact same titles of all kinds, and which is unusual, and maybe some would call it enmeshed, but it's not meant to be that. So we just continue to find ourselves in similar likeness of work because of our history and our experience and our background of education.
Yeah.
And so here we are now at this point in life, but also at this season in life when I have younger children. I said a 5 and 9-year-old, and just finding that the expression of that work looks different in this season.
Yeah, the expression. Yeah, I like that. And there are certainly seasons, and those seasons, the expression of how we go about serving and fulfilling our roles can take on its different shapes and forms during those times. So,
right.
So are you mentioned the creative piece. Are you naturally creative and artistic? And if so, in what way?
I love that question. I have lived my life not thinking I was creative. I have a super creative sister that I've always compared myself to. She's 18 months older than me, and she had the best ideas when we were growing up. And she would come up with an idea like, let's have a skating party and invite all the kids in the neighborhood, and we'll charge 25 cents for them to come, and we'll give them this and that, and we'll create this and that. And I was along for the ride, and I'm one of 5. I'm the middle child of 5 kids. And so I kind of was along for the ride. And yet I have come to learn and discover I actually call myself now a creative catalyst. And I think that was probably my role with my sister as well. And seeing I really would support her, and I would say, yes, I'm here alongside of you with that. And I call myself an idea person as well. That's probably one of my top strengths that God has given me. And so I'm more of a creative thinker. And the way that I live that out has been intention. It's been hard to reconcile that. Do I call myself an artist? What type of art do I create? What is my medium? And so that's something I've wrestled with as well as an adult. My husband is also extremely creative, and he'll often say to me, this came about because it was your idea, actually. And I think,
the catalyst piece there.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe we're all creative people, and yet we have to wrestle with what does that look like as the artist in our everyday life. And so, so to answer your question, I do believe God created me creative, and probably always was creative. And yet the way that it looked in form and shape was probably different than what I would have chosen. And yet now I'm living it out in a really fun come alongside.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. And I loved just kind of the contrast between, what you said, growing up years, being a middle child, and you said I was kind of always along for the ride. So going from along for the ride to creative catalyst, that's a cool just picture there, to be a creative catalyst, and to see that creative piece come out in yourself, but also to be an idea person to help others in that journey.
And I would add to that too, one of the most fulfilling parts of what I'm doing now has been to create spaces for people to create. And so coming out of my own tough transition, I entered into a sabbatical. And from that time, it was really this unique opportunity to meet with God and just to be like in this kind of angsty place of what do I do now? And lots of questions, but I rested and I played and I came back to reevaluate. And so that's what I believe everybody should do in transition to utilize their creativity. And I can talk more about that, but I felt like one of the things that came from my transition was this beautiful opportunity to create some new things, some new ways of meeting with people in transition. And so that was just this really fun discovery for me. That came from it. So
yeah, that's cool. And so I often also talk about with people I coach going through transition and stuff about the potential for creative moments and opportunities in seasons of change. So there's the creative moments, there's the creative opportunities. And I hear you saying the same thing. And that's definitely, it's a focus of what you do. So what does that look like? Okay. You want to help someone create space in their transition journey, or maybe not only, I'm not assuming it's only transition they're dealing with. Maybe they just need to rest. But what are some things that you do to help that process unfold, to facilitate that?
Yeah, so I would suggest what I was just alluding to. First of all, to rest. You and I probably come up against some of the same barriers for people, that they are just like in this go mode and that they don't even know what's going on inside of them. And so people often will come to me and is in this place of burnout, and that's familiar territory for me too. I've burned out my adrenal glands 3 times, and that's not something I'm proud of. It's really something that I've had to be aware of and say, this is my release of control and my invitation to rest and to really acknowledge my limitations. And so I think rest is such a key part of it, to take a sabbatical, to listen to what your body's saying, to listen to any of the lights on the dashboard that are indicating that we've done too much. I think people will often say it's impossible to take a break, and yet I feel like it's necessary. You're either going to do it now or you're going to do it after the fact that you burn out. And so I just strongly encourage people towards that. And I find it really interesting. This is a really fun example that I came across here in Spain recently. There's this restaurant, Mugaritz, it's called. They're number 9 in the world for the best restaurant. And I can't say that I've been there yet because of that. But they say they close for 4 months every year. So they take 4 out of 12 months to take time off, because they understand if they want to do something really important and creative, that they have to stop and rest and reflect and discover new ideas.
Wow.
And I just found that to be a really powerful example for me of the creative process and that need for the incubation period that you see in the creative process. And that's what transition is. It's really that time, that pause. I would say, secondly, probably the most exciting part for me is the play aspect and element, and just encouraging people to create, just to break out of boxes, try something new, take a risk, be curious. If that means they are doing that in a sabbatical or in a time of rest, I think that allows them some opportunity for time. That might mean taking a new class, or a twist on something that they've always done or liked doing. I think helping people surround themselves with creativity. I know for me, if I need to write something, I go to some of my favorite authors. Like they just have a way of giving flair to words and playing with words in a way that I get really stuck with. And so I look at them as my mentors in creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm going to create a new recipe, which I don't often, but if I want to, then I go to read some new recipes online. What are other people doing with this? So
Yeah.
and I also think just having a sense of humor and not being afraid of failure, just trying something. And that, for many of us, and probably most of us, is really a painful, difficult, scary place. Probably laden with some history there that we need to acknowledge and tap into a little bit. But I'm reminded that most people's success rises out of the ashes of failure, and that if we get that opportunity and we take the opportunity, even if we fail, we gave it a chance, or we gave it a shot, and yet many beautiful new things come out of just making that attempt and executing something new. So
that's good. Yeah. That kind of takes me back to a big transition that I went through a number of years ago, where at some point I just felt a permission, and I really don't know, how this permission piece came, but to explore, to dream, just to dream for the sake of dreaming, not that I had to, set goals around those things that I was dreaming about necessarily.
Right.
And the truth that there did some goals, some life planning and goals did come out of that, but that wasn't the motivation for me. And so I think that's a creative piece, the dreaming piece you create.
Right.
And so it kind of goes along with what you're talking about, is rest, and play. And when you do those things, they're just open, like you said, create space. And so for me, that just the dreaming for the sake of dreaming, it really was helpful, just what could be, what could this look like?
Exactly. And that's actually what I would say third, after resting and after playing, is to take a period of reevaluation. And then you have that opportunity to dream, like, what are my longings? What have I been desiring? Just actually tapping into those unmet, unfulfilled dreams that you've had. And I think applying what you've just learned to what you already know. So if you do take that time to play and to explore and recreate, almost like jazz or drama or dance, you're not talking about something completely new, but you're talking about a connection of ideas and a recreation of ideas.
Good.
And so you're getting this opportunity to, what if, what does this look like if? And like you said, just the giving yourself permission to dream, applying what you've just learned to what you already know, and not necessarily coming up with a new idea, but connecting ideas.
I like that piece. Yeah. Connecting sometimes it just seems like, well, I've kind of fragmented, it's out there, but it's not necessarily the timing is everything, right? So we don't always see it come together as we, assume it might or think it might, but it's opening up that space for dreaming and thinking outside the box. And that was the question I was going to kind of ask you about this area. Is why do you think it's hard to think outside the box in transition seasons?
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons it's hard, but especially in transition, I think we can get kind of pragmatic, right? We need to have an answer. What are we doing next?
Yeah.
Where are we going next? How are the bills going to get paid? It's sort of that pressure. And that's why I go back to, if we can actually take a season of rest and take a sabbatical, or be given that permission to play, that is the space that's often needed. I think too, being afraid to fail. Gosh, what if I step out and I'm not that person anymore? What if I'm something different? What if this looks completely different? What if I'm not called to be in this specific place?
Yeah.
It's a scary step of faith. And I think many of us have self-limiting beliefs. I know, like I said, I compared myself a lot. My husband's really creative, and he, almost anything he touches, he can create something new from. We got to Spain, and he all of a sudden became a woodworker. I was like, where did this come from? You can create out of recycled stuff. Like, how did this happen? Where did this come from? You know, we were just showing up at wherever the leftover things were left. So that's very common in Spain. So I think comparing ourselves to others and listening to those self-limiting beliefs, which could come from others and could come from ourselves. So tapping into where do those come from, and how do I actually live into what it is that is true about me, that God has created in me.
Yeah. And do you think sometimes it's also like how, if I start thinking outside the box, if I start looking at these things, how is it going to impact my family and those around me?
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
that's,
Breeding the discontent a little bit.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just, and how is that going to impact them? Do I have, is that even a responsible thing for me to do?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so that's a challenge, and creating space for that, going back to, creating space, rest, like you said, for that is so important. What are some things that you found helpful to you mentioned limited thinking earlier on in our conversation. So what are some things you found helpful to break us out of the limited thinking and transition in order to really engage that creative process?
Yeah, for me, I sort of gave myself the space to write, and just a free write. And not, like you said before, not to have it was to be in process, not to have a end goal. It's not for performance. I took myself on walks, and I let myself just explore and engage with my body in that way, also through stretching or yoga. And I think one of the most important is to have people alongside of you, to help give you that real perspective of what is going on, and it's going to be okay. And I've been there, and there's beauty on the other side of this darkness and this pain, and just helping to really engage with your thinking, and to break open some of the negative thought patterns, or the is this really going to affect my family in all these negative ways? Like, what if I do this? Is it going to be okay? And, just the coming alongside and the having the community of people in it, I think is really huge.
Yeah.
You can't underestimate that.
Yeah. The community connection, and sometimes transition seasons can feel very isolating for us.
Exactly.
And is this just kind of, am I just in my own little internal world here? Because I am an internal processor. So I do, and I'm like questioning if I just need to break out of this and get on with life, or, and so for me, what you're saying was really helpful, having someone to come alongside. And this make sound like a commercial for our work here, but
no, exactly,
for what you and I do, but it really is important to have someone coming alongside, asking the right questions, helping to open up just a new perspective, giving us permission if that's what we need, just some of those areas. So yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
And validating that it really is painful, and it's hard, and it's complicated. I think especially for global workers, it's very complicated. It has so many layers. You're not just talking about a role. You're talking about a geographical location and a family being impacted, and, and so it really, the validation is an enormous piece that we can't overlook as well. And why we do what we do, right? This is something that others have done for us. And so we've seen the value in it.
Right. Yeah. And that's come out. Yeah. It's come out of just a personal kind of story, and as I've heard you share your transition story, and as I've shared bits and pieces of mine, through these podcasts. Just really, it comes out of that experience, that transition journey we ourselves have been on. You mentioned this whole, you've mentioned a number of times this kind of creative process. And I like what you said when we were talking about, well, what will we talk about in this conversation? And you said something that really, really stood out to me: creating new in transition. And I love that, just that phrase, creating new in transition. And some of that I think we maybe already alluded to, but is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that for me, when I've started to unpack what is it that is happening inside of us, like our right brain and our left brain, when we're in stuck places.
Okay.
I think that for me, the research behind that has been fascinating to just see that developmentally we've shut that down a lot of times because of the way that we need to engage as an adult and as we have to think and get life done. And yet we were created with both sides of our brain to utilize both sides of our brain. And just being intentional about tapping into that in these times. I think that the transition process really parallels the creative process, which the creative process, you probably know, includes the 4 stages of preparation and incubation, illumination, and implementation. And I think the transition process, like Terry Walling talks about, is really similar. Terry Walling in his book Stuck, and includes those 4 in a slightly different verbed way: entry, evaluation, alignment, and direction. So the incubation period being what I consider the transition process for a lot of people. And that can be months to years, but it is really where the beauty comes from in this season, what can be really lonely and isolating. Somebody said to me in the middle of my transition, the most beautiful art is created in isolation. Like, it's created when you're alone, when you're in the depths of like all of the feelings and often in pain. And so it's this mirroring the transition process and the creative process for me, that grand pause in that opportunity. If we can really shift our thinking to see it as an opportunity instead of, we're going to be stuck here forever, abort, I don't want to stay here anymore.
Yeah.
But what an opportunity it is to really lean into the creative side of us, if we can see it that way.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. And that actually brings me back to literal interpretation of that, the incubation, because one of the hobbies I had growing up and I revived when we were overseas was actually incubating eggs. And so I did this with my children growing up. They were younger, and I found an incubator and set it up, and we started incubating chicken eggs, and and they, of course, they were in awe when the whole process, but not to abort the process, because if even if you see like I recall sometimes when we would see a crack in the egg, meaning that the chick was trying to get out, but they were trying, but we'd be looking at the egg, my kids and I, and we'd say, can you help the chick out? Can you help it out? No, you can't do that. They have to gather enough strength and to come out on the other side of that. They need to go through the process, and so not to abort that process, that incubation process, that season of being in there in that space is so important to see beauty on the other side. And that's
really good. I get a full body feeling on that one.
That's good.
Not that long ago for me, but it is so true that the beauty that comes from it at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, so this has been really great. I just really appreciate you spending some time with me in such a critical area of just in these pivotal seasons of our lives. And I really believe that whether they're our listeners out there, who are many of them are working globally. They're navigating tough seasons. They're in geographically tough places. But they're also whether going through internal transitions, or things that are happening externally, even forced transitions,
right.
Rug pulled out transitions. So I think there's a lot of good things in here that we can. I know I want to reflect on myself on this conversation we've had today. There's been some really good things. So for a listener, as we wrap our time up today, for a listener who would be feeling stuck in transition, what kind of final piece of advice would you leave us with today?
Yeah, I would say I don't want to minimize at all the complication and the feelings that come with transition and how isolating it can feel and how overwhelming it can feel. And yet at the same time, really being able to give ourselves an opportunity to think about transition differently can allow us to engage with it in a way that we can tap into what exists, the creativity that exists in all of us that wants to express itself in a unique and imaginative way through us. And that's what God has created in us. And that's what he's asking of us. Yeah. And yet acknowledging it takes a lot of faith, and it takes that step sometimes of just saying, this really hurts. This is painful. And yet I believe there's something more for me in this world. And so I would just encourage people to really lean into the longings and dreams, like you were saying as well. And just giving yourself that opportunity, if you can, to rest, to really be able to give space to play and creativity, and also just have somebody come alongside of them as well. Those are the three things that I really recommend for people.
Great encouragement. Sara, thank you so much for spending some time with me today and having this conversation together. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I think we could probably keep talking for a while since we're both passionate about this. So yes, thank you for giving me the chance. So
we might have to have a part 2.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to.
Hey, I want to encourage you to check out Sara's website at thewaybetween.org and take advantage of all the great resources she offers. Setting apart time to rest, play, and reflect is extremely critical during transition seasons, but so often we forge ahead to the next thing without once hitting the pause button, and we miss those creative moments. What would it look like to have that creative space that you need for a winning transition? A coach is someone who comes alongside you in your journey to help you create space and engage those creative moments in transition seasons. To learn more, book a discovery call with me at EncompassLifeCoaching.com if you're interested to learn how working with a coach can help you get unstuck and grow during this time of transition. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Navigate Podcast. I've been your host, Tim Austin. And if this has been helpful to you, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe to the podcast so that you're sure to get in on the next episode. And I'll see you there.